Bhuteshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatir Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 9, Text 14. Kalpantadetadakilam jatareena grihnan Shite puman swadrik ananta shakastadanke Yanna bisinduruha kanchana loka padma Garbhe dyuman bhagavate pranatosmi tasmai Kalpantadetadakilam jatareena grihnan Shite puman swadrik ananta sakastadanke Yanna bisinduruha kanchana loka padma Garbhe dyuman bhagavate pranatosmi tasmai Kalpantadetajakilam jatarena grihnan Shite puman swadrik ananta sakastadanke Yanna bisinduruha kanchana loka padma Garbhe dyuman bhagavate pranatosmi tasmai. Synonyms: Kalpa ante, at the end of the millennium, etat, this universe, akilam, all, jatarena, within the belly, grihnan, withdrawing, site, lying down, lie down, puman, the supreme person, swadrik, looking upon himself, ananta, the unlimited being, sesha, sakaha, accompanied by tat anke, on his lap, yet, from whose, nabhi, navel, sindhu, ocean, ruha, sprouted, kanchana, golden, loka, planet, Padma, of the lotus, Garbhe, on the world, Dyuman, Lord Brahma, Bhagavate, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Pranataha, offering obeisances, Asmi, I am, Tasmai, unto him. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: My dear Lord, at the end of each millennium, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu, dissolves everything manifested within the universe into his belly. He lies down on the lap of Seshanaga. From his navel sprouts a golden lotus flower on a stem, and on that lotus, Lord Brahma is created. I can understand that you are the same Supreme Godhead. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport: Dhruva Maharaja's understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is complete. In the Vedas, it is said, Yasmin Vijnate Sarvamevam Vijnatam Bhavati. Knowledge received through the transcendental, costless mercy of the Lord is so perfect that by that knowledge the devotee becomes acquainted with all the different manifestations of the Lord. Lord Kshiradaka Sai Vishnu was present before Dhruva Maharaj, who could also understand the Lord's two other forms, namely Garbhodak Sai Vishnu and Karanodak Sai Vishnu or Mahavishnu. Regarding Mahavishnu, it is stated in the Brahma Samhita 5.48. यस्यैकनिश्वसितकालमतावलम्ब्य जीवन्ति लोमविलजा जगदण्डनाथाः विष्णुर्महान् स इह यस्य कलाविशेषो गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि. At the end of each and every millennium, when all the material worlds are dissolved, everything enters the body of Garbhodak Sai Vishnu, who is lying on the lap of Seshanaga, another form of the Lord. Those who are not devotees cannot understand the different forms of Lord Vishnu and their positions in regard to the creation. Sometimes the atheists argue, how can a flower sprout from the navel of Garbhodak Sai Vishnu? They consider all statements of Shastras to be stories. As a result of their inexperience in the absolute truth and their reluctance to accept authority, they become more and more atheistic. They cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But a devotee like Dhruva Maharaj, by the grace of the Lord, knows all manifestations of the Lord and their different positions. It is said that anyone who has even a little of Lord's grace can understand his glories. Others may go on speculating on the absolute truth, but they will always be unable to understand the Lord. In other words, unless one comes in contact with a devotee, it is not possible to understand the transcendental form or the spiritual world and its transcendental activities. नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पार्षदादेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. I humbly bow down to all the assembled Vaishnavas and thank you for giving me an opportunity to purify myself. So we are in the fourth canto, chapter 9, and this is text 14. So this is a series of verses Dhruva Maharaj, he has actually performed his um, uh, penance, meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead on the instruction of Narada Muni. He chanted the mantra of Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and then because of his intense desire to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord Himself appeared before him. And it's mentioned in the first, so there's a series of prayers which Dhruva Maharaj is offering to Supreme Personality of Godhead. And to understand the background, Dhruva Maharaj is a small boy. And to have this level of understanding is almost impossible for anybody, because he just had a fallout with his stepmother, and because of that he wanted a spiritual kingdom. He wanted a kingdom as big as his great grandfather, and with such material motivation, one would wonder how would he have this level of understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the answer to this question is in the first verse. And Dhruva Maharaj, when he starts praying, Yontah pravishya mama vacham imam prasuptam sanjeevayat akila shakti dharasvadamna anyam stahasta charana shravanastvagadin prana namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam. He says, when Dhruva Maharaj saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Personality of Godhead with his conch shell touched Dhruva Maharaj on his head. And that because of that transcendental contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, on seeing him in person, Dhruva Maharaj says that Anyamsta hasta charanas Shravanas Twag Adi, including my skin, my earring, my hearing, and all my senses have been completely purified, and they have been transcendentalized because of your touch. So because of that, Dhruva Maharaj is able to offer these prayers which are of so high spiritual knowledge, and he's able to understand the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he is, and Tattvataha. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned, Janma karma chame divyam yogam yoveti tattvataha. If one knows the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his original form and as it is, then he doesn't take any birth anymore. So that is the actual definition of a liberation. And Taktya deham punarjanma naiti mameti sarjuna. So he goes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. So that's the state where Guru Maharaj has got to, because he has been transcendentalized or spiritualized by association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he's actually giving a prayer here. He says that, my dear Lord, at the end of each millennium, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu, dissolves everything manifested within the universe into his belly. He lies on the lap of Seshanaga. From his navel sprouts a golden lotus flower on a stem. And on that lotus, Lord Brahma is created. I can understand that you are the Supreme Godhead. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto you. So he is giving the reason for this entire cosmic manifestation, and is offering his respects, saying that the same person who is standing in front of me is the root cause for everything which is manifested in this world, including Brahma, who came from his lotus navel. And he's giving us this overall perspective. So what happens? So if you see the scientific literature today, there are two different theories for the creation of the universe. One theory is the Big Bang theory, which is very prominent, where they say there was a Big Bang, and after that everything started coming into manifestation. And the other theory which is going along is called the pulsating theory. The pulsating theory states that the universe expands and contracts. So at this point, the universe is expanding. And that, even though this is a theory, it's not been proved. But here, Dhruva Maharaj is giving us this explanation, saying that at the end of the millennium, the Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu takes everything into his belly, and all the living entities, the jivas, and every entire material manifestation goes into his belly. Chatrena Grishna. So that is really amazing point, because we can't do this by sort of, there are three ways to gather knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam talks about it, and the three ways to gather knowledge are pratyaksha is direct perception. So we see that the apple is falling down from the tree, and then we know that there is something pulling the apple from the tree. So that's pratyaksha. And anumana is thinking about it or contemplating and speculating about it. So for example, we have the Bhashyas of Adi Shankaracharya, where he talks about a rope and a snake analogy, where we can think about, why do we think about the rope as a snake, and is the snake real or the rope real? or is the imagination that the snake is the rope, is that real, right? So all these things are anumana or contemplation based on some evidence, and that gives us so anything you see in this material world is under these two perspectives, which is pratyaksha and anumana. But here the third one is called shabda pramana, which is more transcendental, and it is not transferred through a direct perception. So here Dhruva Maharaj is giving that example where just by being in the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has got the entire knowledge of the entire creation, and he knows that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is the cause of everything. And so the main important point which Srila Prabhupada drives home in this purport is that one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead through one's own endeavor. And in the Bhagavad Gita, it's again confirmed that dadami buddhiyogam tam enamam upayantite. So if one renders devotional service, loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself gives the knowledge through which one can get to him. So, and in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it's again mentioned, Sevan Mukehi Jihvadu Swayam Eva Spuratyataha. So this knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you cannot go and try reading from the books, because it has to come from within. And that's what Dhruva Maharaj is saying. Now I have come to this understanding that I can understand that you are the same Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore I offer my special obeisances unto you. So that's a very important point being mentioned, that any amount of endeavor from our part by gathering all forms of material knowledge will not help us, but it has to be the causeless mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so that we'll be able to understand him. So it's more, so it has to happen from within. So any form of pratyaksha or anumana will not take us to the supreme realization or the understanding of who Supreme Personality of Godhead is. And we have seen this in multiple instances. So in the Bhagavatam, it is mentioned the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called adokshaja and apareya. So he's not a part of this material world, and he is beyond this material world. So with anything we do, and if we try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead with anything in this material world, it's not going to take us there. So, and it has to come from the transcendental mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to give us this realization. So that's our plea, that in the association of the devotees and by the mercy of the Guru, that the Supreme Personality of Godhead reveals himself to us. So in this regard, I got reminded of an example which is typically mentioned in the Shastras about knowledge. Right? So typically we think knowledge is, in the material world, knowledge is kept in a very high pedestal, that one who has the knowledge is typically in charge of the material, typically controls everything, right? So or be it the financial sector or everything, anybody who has knowledge is the top of the spectrum. But the Vedas put this knowledge in a perspective. So the knowledge, typically the example given is about a tree and the moon beyond the tree. So the knowledge is more like the tree, which helps to frame the moon in context of the tree. For example, if you want to know what the so if you consider the moon to be the absolute truth and the Shastras or knowledge to be the tree, the knowledge actually frames the absolute truth in a perspective, so that we can get to we can make endeavors to actually reach the absolute truth. So that's the so the way we understand knowledge is that it's just like a tree, where we put the moon in perspective of where the tree is and see where the moon is located. Similarly, knowledge helps us to understand and get to the perspective as to what the Supreme Personality of Godhead is and what the absolute truth is. But then after that, we have to make our own endeavor to develop loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's when the Supreme Personality of Godhead reveals himself. And because he says, Dadami buddhi yogam tam, says, Pajatam priti purvakam. If one renders loving devotional service to me, then I give the knowledge through which one will be able to come to me. So this has been exemplified in multiple places in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And one instance which came to me, I was listening to a lecture by Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada said, it's only the grace of Krishna that one can know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And but Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so merciful because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu not only gave knowledge of Krishna, but he also gave access to Krishna Prema. So it speaks about how just by chanting of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can get rasa, one can get prema bhakti, one can get devotional service, and the knowledge of Krishna. All of them come to the person who chants. And we see in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it says the chanting of the holy names of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has six attributes: Kleshagni, Shubhata, Shubhada, Moksha Lagutakrit, Sudurlabha, Chandrananda Visheshatma, and Sri Krishna Akarshani. So Kleshagni destroys all the three kleshas. We have three different kleshas, namely Adhyatmic, Adibhautik, and Adidhaivik kleshas. And then all these are removed when one chants the Supreme Personality of God's name. Kleshagni, Shubhada, it brings all auspiciousness. And moksha lagutagrit, it makes moksha or liberation almost worthless, because you see that associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the Goloka of Vrindavan is the highest, and you don't worry about moksha. Moksha lagutagrit, sudurlabha, it's very difficult to achieve. And Sandrananda Visheshatma and Sri Krishna Akarshani. Sri Krishna Akarshani is that the holy names attract Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. So these are the characteristics of the chanting of the holy name of the Lord. And it's mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that by chanting the holy name of the Lord, we can achieve all aspects of bhakti. But so Srila Prabhupada here contrasts and says that those who are not devotees cannot understand the different forms of Vishnu and their position in regard to the creation. And sometimes the atheists argue, how can a flower stem sprout from the navel of Garbhodakasai Vishnu? They consider all the statements of Shastras to be stories. So this reminded me of a verse from the Ishopanishad. So it said, Vidyam cha avidyam cha yastadvedo bayagum saha avidyayam mrityumti itva vidyayam mritamashnute. So here Ishopanishad says, what is knowledge and what is ignorance? And it says that if one pursues the path of knowledge, then one achieves amritam ashnute, one achieves the liberation or the state beyond this material world. And if one follows the path of ignorance or avidya, then one goes to andam tamaha parvishanti. So it goes to the darkest region of hell. So here, so that what this means is that to understand the Shastras, to understand these finer spiritual subjects, one need to have Shraddha. And so because that's why Rupa Goswami says, Adav Shraddha, Tada Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti. So these are gradual stages in the path of bhakti. And the Adav Shraddha, which is the starting point or the fulcrum of the devotional life, happens when one associates with devotees. The association can be in different forms, like one can physically associate, one can associate with Vani, and one can render devotional service physically. So all these are different forms of association, and one associates with the spiritually elevated person, then our shraddha or the faith in the messages of the Shastras, in the message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes more ingrained, and then one will be able to take the real understand the real essence of the Shastras. For example, in this case, it's mentioned how the from the nabi of the Garbhodakasai Vishnu, the lotus flower stem sprouted, and from there Brahma evolved, and from there the entire creation manifested. So these are finer points, and these are not available for everybody. And people who are not with the shraddha or the right understanding or the faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, these things are very much removed, and we will not be able to understand the actual crux of the Shastras. So that's the point which Srila Prabhupada makes, where he says that it has to happen with the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in our power, and what we have is, it's not to be taken in the negative context that if everything has to happen by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then we don't have to do anything. So it's always the endeavor from our part, and then the mercy from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so that's the path of devotional service, where we make our endeavor by performing the tenets of the sadhana bhakti, and by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the mercy of the Guru and the Vaishnavas, the Lord Krishna eventually reveals himself in the heart of the devotee. So that's the process of devotional service, and that's the process of Krishna consciousness. So those are some of the points I could gather on this topic. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to purify myself. Hare Krishna.